It's eternal. It's like, okay, boom. One of the first interesting ideas that started my evolution was a very simple concept. Most people have heard this concept, but if you can understand it, if you can participate in it, and you can use it in your life, then it changes everything. That concept was simple on the surface, but once you explore the nuance and what's underneath the surface, you'll find something interesting. And that's what I'm about to share with you. So this simple concept is how desire, how our own drive for happiness, which is the same thing that we all share in common, a drive for happiness. It's something that unites all of us. We're all trying to make this world, hopefully, and definitely our little slice of that world, our experience of this world better. But unfortunately, if it's not understood, that drive for happiness, that desire, it can lead you to kind of a self-created prison, kind of this, let's say, obsession or overindulgence or lack of knowing consequences of your actions that truly bring you that happiness, that drive for enjoyment that started the intention or started the action. You were looking for enjoyment, you did something, but actually the end of that was what I'm calling a self-created prison. So that natural drive that we all have, that we all share, if it's not guided correctly, it can actually lead to our own ruin. So the main thing to understand about this is that real happiness that will actually fulfill you, like to satiate that need, to itch that scratch, to finally feel at home and secure and fulfilled instead of anxious and wanting and craving and longing and bitterness and all these other things. That happiness is found in a certain mental attitude and a mental approach to life. And once you're established in that, it's eternal. It's like, okay, boom, you turn on a light switch, you're on. Whereas what most people are searching for is a momentary happiness. They're looking for a thing, a person, an experience to lift them up, to make them feel whole, to make them feel alive. But the problem with that approach is that once you reach that goal, let's say you want to buy a new electronic or a new phone or a new computer, or it could be anything, a new guitar, whatever your fancy is. Once you reach that, you're usually, you're excited for maybe a week or so, if that, and then it's really on to the next thing. So that longing, that desire for happiness is never fulfilled by the external experience. I'm offering that you never really are satisfied by an external experience. It's like you eat something nice and then it's great. And then, 10 minutes later, you just want to eat something nice again. And to build on that, what if there was a way to find a happiness that was not dependent on external experiences? And once it was understood and developed and became your very personality, you practiced it enough to understand it, to reason it out, and then you united your personality with it. You became a person who was, by his very nature, fulfilled. And that's a complex scenario, but I'm going to explain how you can get there. But in terms of understanding desire, it's so important to understand that there's really no way to sugarcoat it. The enjoyments of this world are simply an illusion. They are a delusion. All desires for happiness are a mirage. And that's a huge concept. And you'll have to unpack that. You'll have to really think about that and consider it for your life. Now, don't discard it before you consider it. That would be unwise. because it may have a gift in it. You may not understand it in the way that I just communicated it, but you can certainly expand your awareness of your own actions and what you're creating in your life and your relationship with happiness and your relationship with what you're trying to create. Because this is really what it's about, is like optimizing, in a sense, what we're doing and how we're doing it and how to actually fulfill our needs in a more complete way. So again, all enjoyments of this world are an illusion. They're a delusion. And all desires for happiness in the worldly world are mirage. Now, that's actually extremely beneficial because you're going to have an experience and be let down. You're going to have an experience and you're going to be let down. Have an experience, be let down. And through the process of elimination, you'll know that that's not it. The problem with most people have is they never get that experience. Maybe they want something very expensive or something outside of their reach. And so the process becomes always striving, always longing, always desiring, but never getting to that desire, to that end, and then being unfulfilled by it so you can eliminate that and move on to something else. So that's kind of the concept here. I mean, you've experienced it many times. You wanted something, you got it, and you were let down. Or it didn't create a long-lasting fulfillment. That's what you have to qualify it by. That's how you have to say it. Well, if it was happiness, once I got it, it would last. If not, you're always on the wheel. You always have to go on this whole process of picking a new target, striving to get that target, and then once you get it, you're happy. Well, then it repeats, then it repeats, then it repeats. And that's a very laborious task instead. But I'm saying that there's ways to find happiness that are more sturdy, that you can build a foundation on, that once you find that and become that, it's long lasting, it's eternal. And that's what we mean in a spiritual sense, what is real and what's not real. As a side note, if it's transitory, if it changes in a sense, it's not real from a spiritual sense. And that's a larger concept which we'll talk about. But relevant to this conversation, it's not real happiness or real fulfillment because it's bound to a certain end. It's bound to a certain scenario. And if that end or that scenario is not present, if you're not eating, in that example of eating, the second that eating is done, boom, the enjoyment that comes from it is gone. So it's very transitory. It's very illusionary. It's very mirage. That's what I mean by all those desires for happiness. We think it's going to bring something. And the problem with this is because it becomes compulsory. It becomes about the search. It becomes about the longing. Because once you get it, then you just get in another mode of searching. And so it becomes very obsessive. And the way that it's very common for that to work in our lives is if you compulsively rely on your senses for gratification, for enjoyment. Senses being things you look at, things you can eat, things that you touch or you hear, your senses. If you compulsively rely on your senses for gratification or enjoyment, it leads you to your ruin, okay? Because it's a bottomless pit. You never fulfill that need because it's once it happens, it's done, it's over, and then you just go on. And then that you go on to searching again, and that searching builds in momentum. It builds in momentum. It becomes very compulsory, very obsessive. I need things to be exactly like this, certain conditions for me to be happy. And we don't even realize it. I have to go out on Friday night, or I have to have these amazing things, or everything has to be beauty. I have to be surrounded with beauty. So it's very interesting if you can kind of witness your mind. And that was my experience with it. So I spent a lot of time thinking about it because I was given a very rudimentary understanding. I'm trying to explain some of the more nuanced, the more ideas you should consider. But I was delivered when I was young a very just like nuanced, a very lack of nuanced understanding, just a very desirous suffering. And I had to reason it out for myself. I was looking at people and myself, and maybe I would see someone driving just so consumed in, their little story of what they're trying to get out of life, and they just can't even see beyond that. They can't see a fuller picture. I could see in myself where I wanted to connect with maybe people, or I wanted to have these experiences, and it was like this whole emotional drama. And for me, and this is the practice that if you really want to understand this, you'll engage in, is you have to consider that. You have to see it in your life. You have to really explore it in the sense that this is how it's working in my life. Because I can give you some concepts, but the connections won't really be made unless you review them and go over them and listen to this again and kind of see how it's going to work in your life. But the problem for most people, again, and don't fall victim to this, is they're closed, they're unwilling to explore, they're not open-minded, they're not receptive. They can't take it in and consider it, and then ultimately just nothing comes out of that. So again, if you compulsively rely on your senses for gratification, it just kind of leads you to a very nasty end. And what ends up happening is you just keep feeding that. You keep feeding that perspective. And eventually you start to sacrifice your strength, your capacity to work, and even your health. And at that point, just everything's gone. I'll just take one example. Let's say most people's relationship with food is not what you consider. Like if you have a need for food and nourishment, you need to give your body nourishment. But a lot of the things that we eat are just to gratify our senses. They're to, because we enjoy it, right? So what ends up happening is that it just gets out of hand. They create disease. Sometimes we can be overweight. We can create conditions, very out of balance. And so it becomes just a multitude of different body situations that, like I said, you end up sacrificing your strength, your capacity to work, which is, in this world, you have to lift yourself up by your own efforts, which of course is an amazing concept and worth unpacking. You sacrifice your strength, your capacity to work, and even your health. And then it's very hard to do anything. It's very hard to get anywhere. It becomes harder to fulfill that need for satisfaction, harder to fulfill that need that's being expressed underneath the desire for enjoyment and happiness and fulfillment, which in this situation I'm talking about food. So that's what we mean by your only approach is I'm going to get something and I'm going to be happy. It's like an illusion. It's a mirage. It just leads to your ruin. And eventually you just feed it and you crave more. It just gets out of hand. Eventually it just kind of explodes on itself in a certain way. I've considered it. And look, I could be wrong, but I've been pondering it a long time. And what I see is that that's not the way, because it just leads to you sacrificing your strength, your capacity to work, and your health. And then, death soon follows. Not the way I would recommend for a good friend or you. And here's kind of how it works for most people. So I'm talking about this longing, this craving, right? Okay, well, so when your internal situation is it's just covered in craving, like it's just dominated, it's shrouded in this craving. So what happens is that there's a certain shadow that casts on your life. And inside of that shadow, errors crop up. So I could be wanting something, right? And I could be very focused on, that thing. And I'm going towards it. And I've got a little bit of blinders on, okay? And because of those blinders, I'm not open to other opportunities. And then obviously that's an error in this situation, because being open to the highest potential in every moment is obviously the best way to go. So maybe I was trying to get a car or something like that. And then along the way, I abused someone and stole some money. These are extreme examples. Or I had an opportunity to put some money somewhere else that would have made me more money. It's like if you're so focused on one particular point, then it just makes this shadow of ignorance and errors come out of it. You're really going to have to think about it if you want to understand it, but you'll see it in people's life. They become so obsessed with one thing or one situation that they become very incoherent at times. And again, I'm talking about extreme examples because a lot of times it's not that it's so obvious, but you see why people do what they do. And if you can trace, you see what people do, which is a consequence. If you trace that consequence back to the action or the preceding event or what was motivating it or whatever intelligence or attitude was governing that activity, like why it came out, what idea and philosophy they were working towards that made that consequence happen, you'll see that a lot of times people are doing very weird things, very unoptimized things. Let's say they're errors, for lack of a better term. You're like, why are they doing that? That's so stupid. They could just much more easily do this, and they would be way better off. We would be better off. The world would be better off. So a lot of times, it just becomes very crippling. So the main points to understand here is true happiness is based on an internal condition, on building a relationship with knowledge that leads you to truth, and expanding your awareness and finding that internal state, that relationship with yourself. And it's eternal. It's not dependent on a specific situation, an external situation. And in that way, those enjoyments that you really think are momentary, are transitory, that's just a mirage. It's you get something and it's gone. You get something and it's gone. All those worldly things, in that sense, that they're there and they're gone, they're mirage, right? And one way that works for most people is they compulsively rely on their senses, on gratifying themselves. Oh, I need all these things for enjoyment. That's not the way. And that eventually just kind of leads them to their own end. It just gets out of hand. They become nothing but longing and craving. And they get so far away from things that could bring them to happiness, like eating unhealthy, and many times they sacrifice everything for that. And then the final main point I'm presenting here is that when your mind is just steeped and surrounded in that craving, in that always wanting, in that always longing, like that's your mental attitude. You're so biased, you're so not present, you're just not able to act in the most efficient or optimized or coherent way. You can't even find the opportunities that are around you because your mind is just, it's casting the shadow of ignorance in your life. And out of that shadow of ignorance, errors pop up. So thank you so much for being part of this mission, for being part of this journey together. I invite you to support this community, to support me and yourself by sharing this with your friends and going to yogiryan.com and supporting the community. So thank you so much for listening. I appreciate it so much.